see, Peggy, we're going to start. Peggy, Pat, we're starting.
Come on, Driscoll.
Amen.
So this is the July 24th study session of the Littleton City Council. We have a full council in attendance, and we have most of our community at home watching because we need a little vote to get to the council meeting tonight. Our first item is part 2 of the sign code amendments, be presented by City Attorney.
Mayor, Council, we are back to talk to you about 2 areas of the sign code that you'd asked us to take another look at. One was the question of rotating signs, and the other was sort of a mixture of sign twirlers, commercial mascots, and so we looked at both of those. And we looked at a whole series of other cities. For example, Greeley, Centennial, Holder, and just looked at how did other cities address this. And so with that, I want to first talk about the items, which is really rotating signs, commercial mascots, and sign twirlers. Now, unlike many codes, our code actually had no definitions for anything other than commercial mascots. We regulated them, but we didn't have definitions. And one of the difficulties is when you regulate and you don't have a definition, you really sometimes have difficulty defining what it is you regulate. So, we looked at rotating signs, and the first thing that we looked at is incorporating a definition for rotating signs in the code. Now, a rotating sign, based on the definition, is really a sign that is on an actual pedestal and the sign itself rotates. What we noticed is most cities, consistent with our prior code, prohibit rotating signs. Now, at this point, a question had come up, and I spent a lot of time studying this, which is the design of barbershop signs, because the question is are those a rotating sign? To the International Sign Code Association, as well as to several entities that manufacture barbershop signs. They are not a rotating sign. The way that those are actually designed is that they are fixed. You think that the stripes rotate, but they actually don't. There's a pin inside that rotates that creates the impression that the actual sign does. So as such, they would not be a rotating sign. They would just be a regular sign covered under our code. And I will get into why we would recommend deleting the reference to commercial mascots. But in a nutshell, commercial mascots are just another form of human sign. They just happen to be dressed up as a gorilla, or the Statue of Liberty, or I drove by the Enchanted Muffin, and they had Mr. Muffin Man in his muffin uniform as a commercial mascot. But it's a human sign. That's what it is. So, we proposed that we would create a new definition of human signs that would incorporate sign twirlers, commercial mascots. They would be permitted on private property where they sign permit, and they cannot block access in and out of businesses or the sidewalk. Why is the sidewalk important? It's an ADA accessible facility. So if it comes down to a human sign versus a person with a disability, the person with disability wins, because under the ADA they have to be able to access that walk. This gets rid of this whole question of what's a commercial mascot, what's a sign twirler. We're going to have a single, separate, simple definition. If you're a human sign, you're a human sign. We don't care whether you're wearing a gorilla suit or a bathing suit. A human sign is a human sign.
Well, maybe we care.
As long as it meets the requirements of Colorado law.
I'll be the judge.
You will, I'm sure.
And
I volunteer.
going back on the other side of this, we are going to create a definition, and we've taken it from the International Sign Code Association, for rotating signs. And basically, it's as I mentioned. This would basically put the code back to the prohibition on rotating signs was in the code before the original amendments were made. It's consistent with Centennial, it's consistent with most cities. And the reason that rotating signs are generally prohibited is because of the distractive nature of those signs. And however, the human signs, this has been reviewed with Jocelyn Mills and her staff. This provides a much more straightforward means of enforcement. Before we were getting into all kinds of questions about what's a commercial mascot and what's a sign twirler and what. In this way, we get away from all that. We have a single category, human signs. You know, if you're doing it on private property, you need to get a sign code permit. If you're on public property, because that's generally protected by the First Amendment, you're subject to the ADA requirements in terms of not blocking sidewalks. You obviously can't block accesses in and out of the property, and you can't go out in the street. Our street code makes it illegal to actually exit the sidewalk and run out in the street with your human sign. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So, human sign may not exceed 2 feet by 4 feet in size.
Yes.
So, if you have a little person, they could be
Carrying a big sign.
one of those human signs.
I bet because a 2 foot by 4 foot sign
No,
would
I'm
be.
talking about a person wearing a little outfit
no.
with the advertising on the outfit, a little gorilla person.
Yeah. If that sign was more than 2 feet by 4 feet, it would be prohibited. That would be the limit.
But if they can get a small person, they're okay.
If they could get a small person or a big person just carrying a 2 by 4 foot sign without any,
The 2 feet by 4 feet is not what person's dimension.
we're looking at the sign, it's not the person dimension.
I know, but so if they were a walking
Sign,
advertising,
then that's fine.
but they'd have to be small.
They would have to be, very, they would have to be very
Sign.
small or very,
She's saying if it's
wide,
T-shirt.
but basically the issue is we're not going to necessarily look at the person. We're just going to look at the sign face. If the sign face is under 2 feet by 4 feet, it's fine. If the sign face is 3 by 6, it's not.
I think Councilman Cole's question was that they're not carrying a sign, they're painted or
Then,
wearing a sign.
They've got an outfit,
Yeah.
like,
Then they're not a sign, they're a person.
And because essentially, if the issue for us is most of the human signs, and if you look at them, almost all of them actually physically carry a sign. They all carry with something. That if you look at the Enchanted Muffin, he was carrying a 3 foot long L. Enter here. You look at the Statue of Liberty for Liberty Tax. It will say $50 tax returns, and even the commercial mascots, the gorilla, would carry something.
So if it's
But they
Ronald,
would,
if
I
it's
mean-
Ronald McDonald,
Not carrying anything.
not carrying anything, he could be 6 feet tall, it doesn't matter. So I think it's, the 2 by 4 is really a sign, like a square sign, or sometimes people wear like, almost like a sandwich board. So those are what need to be limited to 2 by 4. If instead I decide to paint, the word advertisement across my body, that's not subject to 2 by 4.
That would not be subject to
That's
the 2
just
by
the
4.
human sign. The human
2 by
sign.
4 is the sign that they're carrying. If you're just Ronald McDonald in your sign suit, that would not be subject to the 2 by 4 limitation.
It's your floor.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Or
No,
listen.
I really like the clarification of calling it human sign, so we don't get caught up into what's a mascot, what's a sign twirler, et cetera. And I think at the end of the day, we're getting to the essence of what we were trying to solve for and struggle for, so I like that approach a lot. I want to come back to rotating signs, the sequel. So this one, so here's my issue or concern with this. This is going to apply right now to a business that came into the city of Littleton, has done a lot of, has contributed to lots of community events, has been very successful and hopefully continues to be successful, has helped kind of spur activity in a shopping center that was kind of quiet for a long time. And, you know, we have now changed the rules, and now it affects this business. So we're, of course, talking about Andy's. So because now the ice cream cone is considered a sign, now the ice cream cone is also subject to this rotating sign that's not allowed. And at the end of the day, the rotating sign, the prohibition of a rotating sign is because it's distracting. What one could argue, the rotating signs that say, you know, the billboards that rotate the new advertising is distracting. So this, is this necessarily more distracting than the other? I almost feel like a rotating sign should go under the same, so when someone brings in their sign package to say, here's what's going to be my sign, one of them is going to be rotating, I think it should be allowed subject to review by community development. If we're really worried about distractions, we should be worried about phones today, more so than rotating signs. These are few and far between, and I think we're unfairly impacting a really fantastic business for the city of Littleton.
And just so I think, so council is aware, for signs that would become non-conforming by either the prior ordinance or by adoption of some amendments to that ordinance pursuant to this study session, the code provides that there's a 7-year amortization period. So for the next 7 years, those signs would be non-conforming. What most cities would do is at the end of that 7-year period, they would begin the process of inventorying those signs, and they would eventually get to a point of they would look at the most non-conforming signs, and they might then proceed to abate those. But there would be that 7-year window. Now, this is really a values decision for this body, because you can, while there's a number of cities that prohibit rotating signs, there are cities that allow them. And there's no right or wrong in its values. It's really how you as an elected body see the community. And if you want to permit rotating signs, I'll make the appropriate revisions before this comes back to first read.
Question, if I may, Mayor. Steve, if the council wanted to just allow, let me say it differently. If the council wanted to prohibit rotating signs from this point forward and not require the signs that exist today, the non-conforming, any kind of period of time to be retrofitted or to be addressed, is that possible?
I think I'd be very concerned about, I mean, you could allow all non-conforming to exist. The only concern I would have is if you went after non-conforming immediately and said they have to conform, I think you would have a takings issue.
That isn't what you...
But yeah, so my question would be, for example, if you have, and I'm just taking Andy's custom, for example, the council decided that for the future they were not interested in pursuing these existing non-conforming signs to somehow come into conformance, they could do that.
They could do that, absolutely.
Okay. Or perhaps if there's a change of use on the property, that would be the period of time for which the signs would have to be in
Absolutely, you could do that too. And you could carve out an exception just for those if council so chose. I think, Mayor, there's another.
No.
I find the Andes particularly bothersome because I drive by it every night, and it's so much light. And there are several things about that place besides the rotating sign that are extremely distracting. And so to grant them a special treatment beyond the grandfathering or whatever we're calling it, the 7 years, just doesn't make sense to me. They definitely pushed the limits with the lighting all around the perimeter of the building. They had bright neon signs all the way around. They're getting away with murder, and I don't think we need to help them get away with more for longer.
Free ice cream for you.
So I thought when, this is private or public discussion, I raised the issue of light pollution, and we do have a light pollution standard that I think they may be violating.
too.
You may have to come up here, Jocelyn, to add to the conversation.
Yes. And council members, we did address also certain types of backlighting for signs in the first set of amendments that you did. So we have addressed the lighting issue more than the prior code did before it was amended.
Just specific to Andy's custard, we are working with code enforcement relative to if they're meeting our lighting requirements for off-site spillage requirements. So that's in process.
How many permits would you say we get for rotating signs a year?
Well, we really haven't required, inside up until this conversation, we hadn't really had any requirements that considered those inside if it was, considered that signage if it was technically inside a structure.
Yeah, I'd be leaning more towards case by case, depending on where the sign is, the size of the sign, rather than putting it, no rotating signs, period. I think there's something cool about them, but I think it has to be case by case. It might be hard to monitor, I don't know. Hey, they got one, but I can't have one. I don't know.
Would it be difficult to have it case by case? I think it's a clear-cut policy would be,
Councilmember, I think that could be managed. What would happen is that when you came in with your sign package, you would have to identify if you had a rotating sign. And so we would then, I would expect that it would be appropriate to have some standards. A, they'd have to meet all the lighting requirements already in the code. And then B, we would want to look at some size requirements. I don't think you necessarily would want a rotating sign that was 16 feet tall. You could limit it to 4 feet tall or 2 feet tall. But my expectation is that you're not going to see a huge number of the rotating signs. That will be, I'm sure there will be a business that incorporates them in the sign package, but honestly, I don't think you'll see a huge number.
there's already a size limit for the signs, right?
Depending on the types of signs there is, it'd be very easy to permit this sign, and you could simply say that the rotating sign may not be more than 3 feet tall, or 2 feet tall. And it's really a community value question for the council to provide direction on.
I mean, I agree with Karina on the rotating. I mean, I have no issue with the rotating sign. I actually really like the anti sign, and in the next number below rotating signs with the roof signs, the building element construction only contain a sign should not be permitted. Personally, I don't know if that needs to be in there, because if the sign is conforming, if it fits there, does it really matter if there's an architectural element that is created just for that? I mean, the sign should still have to comply. If it doesn't comply.
Problem I see with the Andes situation is they have the equivalent of a rooftop sign, which I don't believe we allow. But it was permitted because it's technically under a roof, because they put it in a container. And so I think what that kind of full building advertising does is it diminishes the character of the neighborhood. And so much of that neighborhood is Centennial across the street, but still it changed the whole character of that place. And I would not want that across the street from my house, that's for sure.
So I think this actually highlights that this is subjective in nature. That is my neighborhood, and I go by it every day, and I enjoy going by it every day.
Well, we have
As
a
does my
different
kids.
point of view than
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly why it's subjective in nature. And at the end of the day, coming back to philosophically, what are the values of the community? So what I see the values of the community is encouraging small business success. Andy's is a small business. I think it activated a shopping center that was, kind of struggling for a long time. So to me, I think that is, I know for myself and many in my neighborhood, you may know others in my neighborhood that feel differently, but many in my neighborhood now look at that as a gathering place. So I think, to me, it's less necessarily about Andes specifically and about special treatment to Andes, but more about the philosophy of encouraging small business success. And to me, that's, I don't want to limit that. Within, we have light ordinances, and we have, an encompassing sign code package and rules now on size and placement and things like that. Honestly, the difference between whether it's rotating or standing still, the argument of it's distracting, I don't think it's an argument that necessarily holds.
Jerry?
I think, using Andy's as an example, I don't have a problem with the sign, but if it's about the brightness of the sign, I think that's the real issue here. Because I think that structure, everything about it's pretty cool looking. But if it's too bright, as far as lighting goes, that can be addressed, and I bet they'd be willing to work with us, toning it down a hair and still look pretty cool. And I have one other question on subdivision signs when we're ready to move off of this subject.
I think that we get into a place where we have to be considerate of business branding, and that is their branding. I just pulled up their website, and that what they have there is the brand. That is their store design. It's like every McDonald's, essentially, they all follow. It's similar to those ice cream
is another
cones.
example of that.
Yeah, and that is part of branding, and businesses put millions of dollars into branding because they're competing, and they don't just want to be another one out on the street. They want to create that brand. I actually, when I first saw it, I've never seen an Andes before. I don't know. It looks like they are primarily down south, but big in Texas. But I actually thought that was kind of creative. When I do drive by it, it doesn't distract me. I think some signs can be very distracting. A lot of them are those LEDs that go like that, and you can't read it fast enough. And I think that's always been a problem, and I think people should manage those messages better so that you don't keep trying to read it. But I think we have to be really cautious and careful about making sure that we are not putting up saying no to another Andes, or saying no to someone who, just to say no to their branding and then cutting businesses out of Littleton. I drove by there the other night, and it was, 9:30 or so, packed, absolutely packed. The days of the Dairy Queen, and they used to be packed, and you don't see as many Dairy Queens anymore. But I think we have to find a balance there, and I think that being too restrictive will handcuff businesses. I think that the lighting thing is an issue that I'm a little surprised that they've been in business probably a year now, and now we're evaluating their lighting. I think we should have done that early on. But
Yes.
but that, we'll get ahead of that stuff. I just don't. I'm really. I just think that balance between what these businesses need to do in order and how we want our community to look. I mean, some of the coolest signs in the world are in Vegas, old Vegas, and some look good on Broadway, and there are some of those old signs, and so there can be kind of a cool to that. We don't like clutter like that anymore. We don't like, we try to keep things minimized, and I just think that finding that balance, and I think being too restrictive is not finding that balance. So we have a rotating sign that I don't feel is causing a problem either.
If I could ask council, could council come to first a consensus on rotating signs, and then the second consensus would be, I think from a staff standpoint, we would want to recommend a size limit of no more than 3 feet in height. 3 feet in height would be essentially a little bit above that table, and that's a fairly tall sign. And I mean, you could certainly go higher than that, But if council could come to a consensus on those two questions, then I can work with Jocelyn and her staff, and we can address lighting and some of the other issues, I think, consistent with the rest of the code.
Karina?
I think rotating signs should be allowed. And as far as putting a size, to me, I come back to if there is a size limitation in our signs in general over the overall signs package, then that applies whether it's a rooftop sign, whether it's a rotating sign, or whether it's a still sign. So I don't think we should add any additional regulation on top of this. Again, for me, it's more of allow the creativity, I think, for purposes of lighting and, because we just have that overall for our community. I think that's absolutely fair. That's what we should address. But for me, I think rotating or not is fine.
Okay, I agree with Karina. I think I'm just trying to figure out what the actual maximum size of a sign is in here.
Is there a maximum size?
There's a maximum overall signage, and then it depends on the size of the building for exterior signs. Steve and I can work on some
You can work on the
recommendations
size.
based on some of the
Based on the rest of the
standards.
code.
I think 3 feet is a little too restrictive, but you also don't want, something that's 30 feet, spinning
Be
around.
proportionate to the,
Yeah, that's the thing, it becomes a proportional issue, and you can't, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And if Andy's is set back a bit off the road, if it was out on the very, very edge, it would look very different. And
We can work that out, Jocelyn.
okay. And then what, sign code, the series part 3?
We'll have to work with the staff here.
I think we can just work that out. What I'd be inclined to do is once we've come up with a recommended set of, I would just provide that to you by memo and ask for some comments by memo. I honestly don't think it's going to be so significant that the council is going to want or feel necessary to have another study session. Obviously, if you do, I'm happy for that, but I think we can do that by memo.
All right.
So then, do we have another issue in terms of whether or not there's a shopping area and how big those signs can be?
That was not part of what you sent back to us. What you sent back.
I know, but part of my issue is, if you have a shopping area that allows huge signs, and then you have signs on the stores too, potentially, then you're getting a hell of a lot more sign area than what we're talking about in this instance. And it seems to me something that,
And Councilmember, I think you raised a good point. One of this, for what I call future installment of the sign code, one of the things that's unique about the Milton Sign Code is that we establish signs. Normally it's done by building size. Our code establishes it by lot frontage on the public street, which is the most unusual way of doing it. And that is something that I think wants going back to, but that's a fairly complicated amendment. And when we move the sign code over to the zoning side, and when we address this, that gets into tearing apart a whole series of pieces of the sign code. And I think that's something that wants being done, but I understand council's other priorities as well. But you're right, I think we are going to need to address that because our sign code leads to some very, I don't think, ever really anticipated results in terms of the amount of signage you can do. Because looking at street frontage really doesn't have a whole lot of relation to building size and the amount of signage. It's just the way that that code was written many, many years ago. So it's something that I think we as staff will put on our list to proceed with, but it's just that's going to be a fairly complicated amendment, and I would certainly recommend that when we do that, we take that by itself, because
I would agree. The sign code is, we can do the sign code for 2 years. And then we can start on lighting. Yeah, and do it for 2 years too. So they just, and we still wouldn't get it right. So these are very, very hairy, sticky, prickly things. And so I think that we're making some headway with some of the things that we are seeing actually happening in the community, so.
I would observe that when we get to that, we may discover we want to tweak what we're doing now. I mean, just, because it may have ramifications that are don't benefit as much as we'd like.
absolutely, I would tell you, I've never been in a jurisdiction that when it's done a piece of the sign code, it has failed to tweak something else. That's all but guaranteed. And I would expect that will happen here too, that when we get to that piece, there will be some other tweaks council will want.
Okay, next.
I think I have guidance.
Jerry had a question.
There was a question I asked last time, it was on the subdivision signs, entrance and signs. As I read that, it says there can only be one subdivision sign, but subdivisions have multiple entrances.
They're intended only one large entry sign, and that was consistent with the prior code. If that's something, we can certainly look at that. I would tell you that's, again, a fairly standard provision, but I know Jocelyn and I would be happy to go back and look at whether we should allow for, if they have two major entrances into a subdivision, allowing them to have two signs. Most of the subdivisions will have one major entrance, but we can certainly look at that.
But I'm thinking many of our subdivisions, have streets that run through them, like whether it's Windermere or Laddie, those streets. So we have multiple entrances, and just to have one sign allowed, I think puts a lot of folks out of compliance.
We do also have a lot of our, I think what you're saying, neighborhood subdivisions were done through a planned development. And in that regard, a lot of those created that sign allowance in that manner. So you're right, some by straight zoning, they may not be in compliance, but then we have others that were done through the PD process, and those are allowed because you can create your signage.
So they're not going to be required for 7 years to get this thing corrected? I'm thinking of Aberdeen Village, for instance. There's multiple entrances there, and there's little monument signs all over, most everywhere you go into.
Right.
And we can certainly...
And that isn't just Aberdeen Village. I mean, you can go down South Park all over.
So,
Hold on, we got Carol next.
We can look at that one.
Appreciate it, thank you.
I was going to, Oak Brook is an example of no major entrance, but 3 equally not major entrances.
With signs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, look at Trailmark. There's one huge entrance and you won't see a bunch more in. I mean, the neighborhoods are different. So it's not one size fits all. And part of it is part of the charm of the community too. The Aberdeen Village with is it the Swan? Mm-hmm. And it's on the street signs and stuff like that. And that's part of it.
have 10 of those
We're not
signs.
going to get all up in that stuff.
And most of the newer developments have planned development zoning, so they have customized sign packages. So they've addressed that in the customized sign package. So we'll go back and look at that particular issue if that's agreeable.
Karina, did you have it?
Sure.
Okay, Karina and then Kyle.
So mine is more about, what does abatement mean? So you said after 7 years, you said something about abatement. What do you mean by that?
But abatement would be that if a person after the 7 years of amortization did not take down the sign, then it's still non-conforming, and the city would proceed then with developing a program to abate signs. Now,
So the subdivision discussion might be something that we look at 7 years from now, once we identify where there may be some that are not in compliance, what action we take, correct?
and normally what will happen with a jurisdiction that does abatement is once you would first identify possible signs that have reached the amortization period, and then you would normally prioritize those for abatement, because you may find some want an abatement more immediate than others. And so I think obviously the subdivision signs is something I would certainly not want to wait the 7 years. I'd want to start looking at it and saying for straight zoning subdivisions that haven't addressed this, if we need to address it, we come back to council and ask you here's some suggestions on how to address it.
And the only reason,
I just want to also clarify that yes, the abatement process is an option in our sign code. My understanding is historically we have not taken that on for any signs, and we do have signs today that under today's rules, would be considered non-conforming.
and I just get the sense that for subdivision, we're kind of saying all the subdivision signs that we see, even if there's 2 or 3 or 4, we're kind of okay with, right?
Yeah, so we're going to
So I don't want to make it into a bigger deal than it is, and actually, this is a question from a process perspective. So this was, we did not pull this item. So the reasons we're talking about the rotating signs and the human signs are because those were items pulled from when we had our...
You directed specifically that we bring this
So
back to
the
you.
subdivision one, I think we need to get clarification, just so we know, but that was not an item that we pulled to relook at or do.
You directed
Right.
these 2 items. That's why we're back here with these items.
The question of the subdivision was, it's a major sign, because I think most of the Aberdeen ones, are there 2 on each entrance?
One,
On just one?
intersection.
Intersection, okay. Yeah, if there were, because they're all pretty small too, a lot of them are small.
A tombstone.
Yeah, if there was a minimum, if they were smaller than 4 square feet or something, if that wouldn't come towards that, I don't know if that would be an option.
Well, what problem are we trying to fix?
I don't,
And subdivisions, we didn't change.
You brought it up.
Well, that's because it's in here.
It was on the
That's why we
agenda.
have to,
Everything's in here.
It's old
We'll
news.
work on it.
Mayor, council,
Okay,
okay.
we're fine.
We can advise you as to what our recommendations from a staff standpoint are. If this is agreeable, what I'd ask council is for your consensus to move forward in the normal course to a first read on your agenda.
well, one of the things I'd like, if you don't mind, when there's someone who's flying a sign in an intersection, I can see the safety issue there. I guess I'd like to also see kind of what we're trying to fix. What is the problem?
Well, I think.
I don't want to change things just for the sake of changing.
I think the human side's a big concern that.
Well, not now, later, when you present it with the other point.
Okay,
When you-
we can certainly address that.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council.
thank you.
Okay, Jocelyn, this is a discussion on the P4 process. This is, we've had 3 P4s come before us, and so we want to get a bit of an idea on what's happened to those plans, if we do know, since we had the P4s. And then also, I want to have a conversation with council in terms of how you, what you think about the P4 and the process, and what you like, what you don't like, what you think might be something we could change to improve it, things that you like that are going on it that we want to continue. Like I said, we've done the 3 so far, and I know we have, we'll probably end up having more because I think they're going well overall. But we want to, Jocelyn's going to kind of walk us through some stuff on this, and then I want to just make sure we have a good, healthy discussion about tweak it to a point where we're a good, healthy discussion.
Apparently I need a test on how to do this.
It scares me when you say that.
Thank you, Mayor and council, and it's a tag team presentation or conversation with myself and Mark Ralph, city manager. So we do not really have a PowerPoint presentation. I can pull up one of the attachments in your packet was kind of process, so you could kind of see those steps if that would be helpful or whatnot, but yes. We have had 3 P4s so far with that newly adopted code, and we do have a couple more that we anticipate coming in here soon. And I believe we really wanted to just check in to see things that you like about how those presentations have gone, things maybe that you'd like us to work on to revise. And with that, Mark, I'll just see if you have anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, so in the council communication, there are a couple of attachments there one of which is the application for the P4. So we were providing that to council so you can kind of see what we're requesting of the applicants. So that's maybe kind of one area that we would like council feedback to see if those are the kinds of issues. It's very general, very, general, I guess. There's also kind of a review of the process here specifically for a development review, and you can see where the P4 kind of fits into this. So obviously it's very early. We do require a pre-application meeting, then the P4, and then you can kind of see how the rest of the process could play out if they decide to proceed, by the way. So again, just a very broad general discussion here, trying to see if this meets council's expectations, and we'll take notes and see how we might improve.
Pat?
I've enjoyed it. I think, it's still early. We've only, like you said, done the pre, but I haven't got any feedback from the people that have presented, or not presented, but have submitted to us. But I think we're doing what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to give them some direction, let them hear what we're thinking out loud. Last week's conversation was a good one, or I guess 2 weeks ago, regarding the Enser property. And I think they take that to heart. So that's helping them to save time, money, and really hear what the citizens and the council thinks about their direction. So far so good. Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Jerry?
So I do like the process. What I do like is that staff is presenting, not the developer. So and it's not coming off as a sales job to me. But I do like it's kind of the concept of what somebody's thinking of doing. So I think that's good. And another question I do have is, have there been any feedback from the three developers that we've had so far?
Regarding the process?
The process.
Not specifically on the process per se. I would offer, I believe that, both of your point, that the general input is that they're glad they were able to hear that input up front, so that they could choose how to move forward.
Okay. Then the other item I had that of the three that we've had, I would like to have had more information on traffic. I know it's too early for a study and that kind of stuff, but we do have information out there on traffic all over the city. So maybe if, that's been a big issue. I know the Enser property was one, or the Bellevue was another one. Where was the other one? I can't think of what the other one was now.
Mineral Village.
Yep, yeah, the whole thing right there. So if we could have more information on the traffic, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Piggybacking on what Jerry said there about traffic, it would be really helpful to have a summary by staff of the impact on the existing neighborhood of this development, and maybe pros and cons. Yes, it's going to enhance this and it's going to detract from that. Would you be able to say that kind of thing in front of the developer, or is that going too far?
I'm just trying to think it through. How would we manage that? Perhaps I think the challenge, and not that we will work through it, but the challenge is that a lot of times, or at least in these cases, I can't speak to everyone that we'll get in the future, but they were putting enough into it to give us some general idea, but hadn't really gone the next step, if you will. And by the way, none of those have moved forward to any formal application yet, just FYI.
Have they moved forward to the neighborhood meeting, which is the next step?
So neighborhood meetings recognize city staff, we don't participate in those. It's a requirement of applicants, so we ask them to notify us. I think they have in a couple, I'm not sure if all three of them have.
The answer was tonight.
Okay. And generally, well, they have to, and they have to share all of that outcome from it. But anyway, back to the question is, sometimes it's not really as detailed as you would, as an actual formal submittal, which would have more information.
What I'm thinking of is for staff to do that evaluation rather than the developer. It's something that I've noticed as missing from this kind of thing for a long time, is to have an evaluation of how it fits.
So, okay, And I mean, the thing, again, they aren't giving us like a lot of a full depth thing, but relative to where they're either coming to what that zoning is, that was the idea. Maybe we can work on that a little bit more to say, here's the proposal, here's what the current allowance is, right? And maybe what you're saying, a little bit more detail on that. I mean, I think we try to just do it by, here's what is allowed and here's what it is, but.
Jocelyn, I think, to Carol's point, Carol, I almost feel like that's part of the message we can give back to them during the P4, is that what is our acceptable level of impact in the surrounding neighborhoods based on that? Because they, and I don't know what that, it would depend on what each thing looks like, and the impact in terms of traffic, or impact in terms of lighting, or impact in terms of when the traffic is there. So that there at night, we had neighbors where a neighborhood was going to backyards were abutted against a parking lot. And so people were concerned about lights when the people came out of the restaurant at night into their bedrooms. So it would be, those are the types of things that we could push back or give back to them.
And I would love to have staff bring us some of those things also. If not possible, then never mind.
Well, I think since it's a concept and, we're really not getting too deep into the process here, one of the things that I guess staff could do is just provide maybe a list of issues that we see would have to be addressed. For example, could be drainage. We may be keenly aware of some major drainage issues that we're struggling with, and so the concept would have to, in the future, somehow address that, or even traffic to some extent. Just taking the NSER discussion as an example of that, obviously the council's aware that we are looking at a P4 process here with CDOT. The public may not necessarily be fully aware. Those are the kinds of things we get flagged for. It's hard for us to make a judgment about that. That's kind of the problem so early in the process, though.
I've enjoyed this process here. I think it's good to get the feedback ahead of time rather than putting all this time and effort into it and then just hearing that, oh no, we don't really like that. The community doesn't really like that. So I think that's good. I think one of the things, this is probably goes back to what Carol said during that NSER one, is I think that council needs to do a better job of looking at the zoning table and the bigger picture. Just because they're putting a concept in here, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're going to do. They had everything checked off in allowable use. And so if you're looking at doing retail and residential, why are you having all these things? Let's maybe have those. We need to think about tightening those up rather than saying, oh, I don't like the width of this sidewalk or the color of this tree or thing like that. I mean, that's details that we need later down the road, saying, we want to look at the overall height of the buildings, the setbacks, because the details they're gonna change anyways. So I think that's something we need to do a better job of.
Peggy?
The term neighborhood meeting, to me, means indeed the neighborhood, and the people that own the property may live in Europe or someplace. They don't necessarily live in the people that own. So I think the occupants, as well as the owners, need to be notified. Because what we're looking at is trying to, I think, have good neighborhoods, and the people living in them, even if they don't own the place, care, I think.
That's the next step, though.
Yeah, and they do,
after P4.
they are required, I think it's 700 feet to
Remember
mail.
all of these
to-
that we allow P4, it would be an amendment to a plan development or a new plan development. And so when they all require public hearings, right, for that approval. And anytime there's a requirement like that, then it triggers the written notice we have in the code. So when you get to that point,
I'm
now what I'm just saying, so
just
what?
trying to get at the friendly part of this.
Right. So what we recommend, and generally what people do, is they work within that 700 feet to do their neighborhood notice as well.
Which goes to the occupants, not just the property owners.
Right. Well, no, because there is generally, it's harder to find now if they have ways to outreach to the apartment buildings and things like that, that's great. And I suppose they could do door to door. Really haven't gotten into their structure of how they're doing that. We encourage them to include as many occupants and owners as possible. The easiest thing is to send out, something through the mail, but I do believe, not for a the amendment, but for a PDO, we have had people downtown and they have taken that flyer, just door to door to some neighbors. So I think it is how they choose to do that, but we encourage them to do as
A lot of
much.
social media. So, all I'm saying is that we try to encourage that piece of it.
Right, we don't advertise
and
for
I
them.
would like to require it if we can't do that, but
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and we can work towards a couple of things that we've been working on lately is to give them some parameters about where they should hold a public meeting. If they're talking about a project in downtown, just have assumed that, they'd hold the meeting near there. So now in our operating standards, it's a requirement. It's got to be, within that neighborhood or as close as possible. So they couldn't hold, just say they're doing a project in Trailmark and they couldn't have the meeting, in the northeast corner. So just trying to be some logic in what we're asking them and requiring them to do.
Well, and quite honestly, it's to their benefit to get as many people in the neighborhood we need before they start spending millions of dollars going. And these guys do this all over. Everywhere they're developing, cities require this. So this isn't something new. They've got their system, they've got their process. I think, the fact that we do require it, and I think that they usually present what they did at the rezone. We had the neighborhood meeting, this is all who showed up. I don't think we should let it off our radar. I think that we should make sure, I was just talking to the ones out at Trailmark where there's a possible potential for a community neighborhood meeting, and 700 feet from where this would get about 6 homes. So in that regard, if they were a little concerned, they says, no, I'll make sure that it's neighborhood wide. So, some of it's, and Carol and the Jerry and Karina.
To avoid the thing that we got into with the answer thing, where what was presented in pictures was quite different from what was presented as a possibility of reports. Could we have a requirement that in addition to presenting what they have in mind, that they present what could be put there if what they're asking for is maxed out? Make sense? So if they're proposing in pictures a 4-story building, but what they're asking for really is a 10-story building, then let's see the 10-story building. Thank you.
Jerry?
Regarding the neighborhood meeting thing, the properties are have they been posted by that time? Do they have something up?
No,
So
this
not
is
at
all
that
before
time.
a formal
This is all
submittal.
prior to that? So if we told, getting
We
neighbors.
don't advertise it.
We don't, the city doesn't,
City,
understand.
yeah.
But my thought is getting people to a meeting is always difficult. These developers, I think they do know how to get the folks out. But the bottom line is people, they're still going to say, I just heard about it last week after they're building, putting in their first, pylons. So it's a difficult thing. I think, Debbie, as you said, I think the developers have the skills or the knowledge or the experience with doing it. I just hate putting too much stuff on this all the time. We're always trying to fix a problem. It makes me wonder, do we really have problems?
Karina?
Then let's identify what those problems are. If we really have problems, then let's identify what the problem is.
Karina?
I like the P4 process. I think it's doing what we intended it to be, to give some initial guidance from council and actually from citizens as well, because we've gotten a lot of feedback from citizens, so we can bring that forward early. So I do think it's doing what we hoped it would. To some of the comments that were made of what we want to see, what we don't want to see, I think what would be very helpful now that we have a few under our belt is kind of that standard one-pager, so that we're even though each presentation may be different depending on what they're doing, there should almost be like a cover page to, maybe there's a tick mark that says, there's traffic a concern in this area, is drainage a concern in this area? So what are the things that apply to this particular area that help us to focus our attention and ensure we have the right level of detail or facts for those areas? So I feel that we do, and again, this isn't about creating a 10-page presentation. It's that one-page kind of cover that helps us scan and say, okay, this is an area that we need to address X, Y, and Z, or at least make sure that those particular things are addressed. I think that's a good way to begin to objectively look at them, maybe even be more efficient about them, and focus on the things that we should be focused on. Because I think one of the things we want to be careful of, especially with staff presenting, that staff is not doing an evaluation or recommendation at this point, correct? The intent is not to do that. It's really just to present the information that was provided.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify that, so we make sure, so saying that somehow in staff's presentation to you, that would be part of.
Yeah, there's almost like a one-page standard summary page of, and I guess you guys I would ask you to take a look at, we talked about traffic is one that's come up, is traffic a factor to be considered here, maybe drainage, maybe high density, I don't know what those are, but it's almost like that standard one-pager.
So so how we've done the 3 so far, maybe we can build on this, we kind of have, here's the existing allowed whatever, uses, height, setbacks, so maybe it just builds a little bit more into that or something, and we make it a little more streamlined somehow.
Yeah, and if it looks the same all the time, I can quickly scan it, as opposed to maybe being presented, because I think you do have that information on, but maybe presented differently in each of them.
Would this apply towards existing properties such as the Armory? This I think would have benefited. No?
It's just for PD.
Okay.
I actually like the P4. I think that there's a risk of us grinding it straight out of usefulness. It's not a rezone. It's really a 30,000 foot, what about this there? Getting into too many of the weeds could ruin a really good project over something that is, something that could have been solved. I think that there's an opportunity for us to be really thoughtful in these and to show the community and the developer who wants to invest millions of dollars in our community that kind of our process of thinking. And so I think that we have a real opportunity there to set a real professional tone. I think that having a little bit more context in terms of this there. So I'm thinking, we look at let's look at the one that was on Mineral, that
Windermere.
Yeah, Windermere and Mineral. And so it would be, so they want to go there, and they wanted, obviously it was a zoning change. It was a pretty massive use change. And the context of that area. So so maybe more like a Google Earth that we can actually then see so that we can get, because it isn't about that piece of property for us. It's about everything around that too, as I think Carol talked about neighborhood impact. And that gives us an idea of what it really is. Like I looked at the Columbine Square when we were doing the Bellevue Corridor vision.
The non-plan.
And the non-plan. And it was interesting to see how few Littleton single-family homes are abutted that property. There's a lot from Inglewood, and then we've got some that get further and deeper west, but it was so just that kind of context I think is helpful, which helps us with the placement. And then I think to continue to keep the information that we get, that it's, and this is your challenge, but to help us to be able to stay focused on what the full intent of the P4 is and why we're doing them. And because they really are, and it's hard. It's like we've got our muscles trained to look at these things and think rezone, and it's training those muscles differently. And so anything you can do in the material that you give us, or maybe the structure of the way that we try to work through the conversation, and then we're all aware and we just get back in our lanes. But that, I think that provides a better return on investment for everybody in their time, including the developer. But I really like that we're doing them, and I think they have been successful so far, which is great. And I do also appreciate that last time we had a more visual. I think that's really helpful. Anybody else? We're good? Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
I like this slide. Is this on the website? On the development activity?
It's in your packet.
No, but is it on the Littleton Plans website?
It is on the city's website under building and development process.
Great.
Okay. Proposed amendment. Is this you?
It's actually the city manager.
City manager.
Yeah,
Okay.
both of us.
This is proposed amendment for Code of Conduct of Council.
May I start, Mayor?
Yes, you may.
So, back in April, we had a conversation with the council just about updating some of your protocols, and one of the items that we identified here at that time was some kind of accountability standards here for council. Council agreed at that time that you weren't necessarily ready, and neither was staff necessarily, to suggest something, so we kind of postponed that topic. So since then, staff has done some research here with multiple cities, and between myself and the city attorney here, we've kind of come up with an example here. It's just an example, so this is just an opportunity for the council to decide if they have interest in this. If so, what could that be? Is that example hitting the target, or are you just looking for something perhaps different? So that's the intent here.
Okay, and a little context also. I sit on the Urban Drainage Flood Control District Board and recently chaired the committee to create a code of conduct for the board, which included the accountability aspect of it. It was generated because there had been some concern that while there had not been a reason to use it, that if it were to arise, that there was nothing that could be done. We saw a couple of things happen in the state legislature this last year or last session, and then one of the mayors on the committee with me, he's on Dr. Cog, and he had worked on their rules because they had a problem. They had a situation arise with one of their board members that required sanctioning, and they really did not have the tools that they needed to do that. And so he brought his expertise to our conversation, and we did put it together, took it to the board, and it was passed unanimously. And one of the things that was kind of discussed is that we hope we never have to use it. But you never know. You just don't know who, when, where, how, why, what. But there has to be show a level of accountability for we set our rules, we say how we're going to treat each other, we say how we're going to act in meetings, act in the public, and when we don't do that, there needs to be an accountability. But lawyers and doctors both are accountable to their own boards. That's where they, and so we're accountable to the public, to the community, but the way that can be, they can respond is recall, which takes a long time. But if you've got a council member that for some reason did something that really there needed to be some some level of action that showed the community that we do not support whatever that was. This is, for lack of a better term, faster acting, and it's self-imposed discipline and accountability. So we've looked at these over the years, and they're challenging because they're kind of messy. But I think it's something that has a higher level of value than not doing it. And it can just sit there and never be used. But if we ever need it, for whatever reason, I mean, and there are examples all over the state where there have been necessary actions, and it's unfortunate, but it's just kind of having it in the toolbox, so to speak, Peggy.
So I think this is good. It seems to me that there's a level before we get to this that we might want to mention. It's sort of an informal feedback that when somebody maybe didn't really intend to do something that might wind up getting to this level. So it's kind of like a coaching or just I don't know, I'm trying to find the right word, but something that would be just in a friendly talk that is beneficial for all of us. I mean, and either could be said to all of us without anybody being singled out, or just a one-on-one over coffee or something. Because this lacking that, it almost escalates things that there's no reason to escalate.
I think that, I mean, the informal reprimand is in there. I think that's kind of what you're explaining.
That's what I was going to say. It's there.
A reprimand is the right word. An informal reprimand is not a friendly behavior. Reprimanding is not friendly, in my mind. It's more, what I'm looking for more is coaching or reflecting or something.
And that really would not be a level of discipline. It would be, I think it would be a professional courtesy.
That's a better word for it.
Yeah. And I mean, we can put that in here somewhere, but I think it's a good idea.
So, because maybe we all need a little bit more of that. Just on an ongoing basis. I don't mean group stuff, but just, did you just wanted to tell you how that struck me, and I don't think that's what you meant, or whatever.
Carol?
I was going to say exactly the same thing, but it seemed that it was there in what he said.
I have a comment.
Jerry
So
and Karina.
I'm not all that comfortable with this, really. I understand the need for it, and there needs to be a tool for it. But on one hand, we're saying it's not punitive, and on the other hand, we're saying we'll have a public censor that the person is unfit to hold office. That's up to the elected people. Dr. Cog and those things are not elected by the citizens. I think if a council member is misbehaving, it does need to be pointed out, which leads me to say, well, who's the judge to say that they're doing wrong? Is it just 4 council members that just don't disagrees with the person? I can see misconduct can be bad. However, I think this is going a little bit too far. It's really up to the citizens. If they don't like what I'm doing or anyone else is doing, there is a recall process. As slow as it may be, there is a process to deal with it right now.
Karina?
My impression was also that this felt a little heavy-handed. And I think some of that, is simply some of the words that may be used. So, for example, informal reprimand. Well, it's informal, so that says, okay, it's not really, can't act upon it. But then when you use the word reprimand, then that feels very heavy-handed. So My impression was this was a little heavy-handed. I do feel there are some things that are very specific that we do need to acknowledge. Things that put our community, our city, or our council at risk where there's like violations of confidential information, et cetera. So I think I would be more supportive of those things that truly can have a very negative impact on our community versus those that are a little bit hard to discern what is misconduct or, so I think let's crawl before we walk and maybe take some initial items that are just very important for everyone's best interest, for the city's best interest, before we take this too far. And allow some of that informality to fall for itself.
I agree with Karina completely on that. There are a couple words, misconduct and disrespect, I think can be quite subjective, especially in heated issues, where a disagreement might be interpreted as disrespect. So I would want to have clear definitions for those if we keep them, but I like Karina's idea of starting with a few of the more concrete items. Such as disclosure of confidential information, things that are measurable and have shall include findings of fact that shows up under censure, and that might be appropriate to put under the other part too. I have a concern about if only the mayor and the pro tem can initiate these. Let's fast forward to a completely different council. None of us are on it. And
Did you get in my email or take my words that I was going to say?
Is that what you want to say?
Well, that is what I said. Who's the judge?
Well, no, I'm going to make a different.
Any four people?
I'm going to make a different point, I think, but it might be the same as yours. But I got here first this time. Let's say the mayor and the pro tem both are involved in something that the rest of council finds objectionable. It looks like there's no way for the rest of council to initiate anything. And that seems like a problem because there would be enough votes, even if a supermajority were required to do something, but you couldn't initiate it. I have a question about what the vote would be. It says vote of council members. Are we looking at 4-3, 5-2? And consequences. In a way, it seems that going through all of this, if there, and I know there can't be, real consequences, because it takes a recall to do real consequences. I'm not real sure that the threat of this stuff is worth making somebody who really wants to misbehave not misbehave.
One of the things that is kind of like this, the common practice of that, because I agree that, the citizens put you here, the citizens will take you out, or keep you in. The censor has been used to help to, I think influence is probably the wrong word, but inform the community. This council person has been behaving badly, and they were censored by their peers for whatever that behavior was. And so that can have an effect on, and the community should know that that's kind of what's happening. So that is why that is typically there. I agree with Carol that, and I was a little uncomfortable with the mayor and the mayor pro tem always in there. I think that you take the ranks out. The mayor should probably be the one who has the initial, conversation with someone on some little oops, because the mayor is the one who guides the protocols. So if somebody broke a protocol, then the mayor should have that conversation. But I think that it should be a body of 7. That we are all. It's not. There's no ranking when it comes to this, because it's really about. It's not really about ranking in there. I get what Karina's saying on some of the stuff seems a little softer than others, but the levels of discipline are the same. So, but I want to continue to recognize the items that we feel are important enough to have some recognition of honoring and not drop them off, but maybe the levels of discipline. Like if somebody violates council protocols, I don't think they should go through the levels of discipline for that, right? You do, and if it becomes habitual or something like that, and you keep trying and trying and trying, then maybe it moves to another level. But a way to delineate those, I think I would feel more comfortable with that too.
Especially given the comment that you just made that, by the peers, we want to make it known that a council member may be violating one of these. And so when we're putting that out to the public, it can't be subjective. It has to be pretty rock solid, that exposes us to a greater risk. So that's why I just want to be careful about what are those things that are more concrete and factual based versus those that are subjective, and we should be treating them a little bit different.
Yeah, I think there are council members that are just, they're going to operate differently. They're just going to operate a little more. There's a council member in another community that has gone beyond First Amendment, will not stop, and that kind of behavior, that has an effect on everything. They're not breaking quasi-judicial, they're not, disclosing confidential information from an attorney. They are just being challenging. So those, where do you just behave, you guys?
But that same person probably got elected.
Just all have to behave.
That same person got elected, so it's really.
Well,
the
exactly,
citizens.
yeah.
And that same person's being recalled.
No,
It's a different one.
yeah, this is a completely, just this
So
small town.
As we're talking through this, I'm having some change of thought on this. We have a code of conduct. So it would seem if somebody violates it, the mayor, maybe with the mayor pro tem, would sit down with the person and talk about how this is affecting ability to work together and maybe the public's confidence in us. It's all private stuff. The idea is to try to do better.
Yep.
But if somebody wants to be difficult, they're going to be difficult, and the citizens are going to see that. And we have had at least once since we've been on a problem and somebody resigned, etc. So I'm not sure we need this other stuff. If somebody does something egregious, and particularly violates a law or whatever, then that's going to be addressed by the law, not by us. As in,
But if it's not a violation of the law, Carolyn.
No, I said if somebody does, just, let's say somebody shoots somebody. That's not, well, that's what I'm saying, if there's a law that gets violated.
That escalated quickly.
It'll be dealt with otherwise. So I think it just gets dealt with privately, the best that mayor and the mayor pro tem, unless they're the ones, the mayor will shape up to mayor pro tem and vice versa.
Or both of them.
And
Or every other person.
we'll shape up, but whatever. But other things the law deals with. And so I don't know that we have to make this so complicated. We're wanting to work together to cultivate working relationship, even as we have different views, different opinions on things that we vote on. So I'm not sure I support laying out levels of discipline and all that stuff.
Carolyn and Kyle, could
you refresh my memory? In fact, I have no memory of this. Why did this come up? What was the origin of this?
Sorry, excuse me. It was in the April discussion when council was updating their protocols. This was kind of flagged as a discussion item, so it came up through that. But what I remember is the council said, okay, well, this is a little too complicated for the task at hand in April, so we're going to push this aside and deal with it later.
And then it came back.
And staff didn't have anything in April that, that you could even consider. So we just needed more time, so that's why we just brought it back. See, if you have interest, great. If you don't, so be it.
I think I'm the one that flagged it when we were doing the protocols. I said, well, what's the code of conduct? What's the point of doing this if there's, so, okay, but if I don't want to agree with it, it doesn't matter. And I think I agree with what you said, the opening remarks, that I'm confident we will never have to use it. But it's important to be prepared in case you do, because at some point when you need to use it, you can't get through and get that done at that point in time. You just look at the General Assembly this past session here. And so I think this is a good example of preparation leads to success. So if you're prepared to deal with something that you may never have to deal, that's why you get insurance. You're not planning on crashing your car or burning your house down, but you're prepared in the event that something that needs to be taken care of. So I think it's important to do this. I don't necessarily think it is too heavy-handed. I think that informal, and sure we can change the word reprimand to notice of. Hand on the back. Yeah, a very firm handshake. A consultation, yeah, whatever that is. I think, that's fair enough. And I don't see, it really ever getting into a formal reprimand or public censure ever, but if it does, I think it's important to have it there, and we lay out those items, and okay, I think before it gets to that, it's going to be discussed by council before it even gets there to the public discussion. So I think it's maybe you need some tweaks, but I support this.
Okay.
I'm going to add that the one thing that Carol, when you talked about the mayor pretend, that's exactly what I was going to say. So
I think, Mayor, something to consider. If you look at recently Denver. Denver had a issue with their mayor and had nothing in their policy. The city council this week they only adopted the censure provision. They didn't adopt an informal means, but they did adopt a very similar provision to what's here, because they said, if we need to have something. We didn't have something when this came up, and so there was nothing that we could do. And the one thing
there was plenty they could have done. They just didn't do it.
So
to say they didn't have that power, they did have the power. They chose not to investigate. So they did have the power.
But that was the argument they made for why they needed this. I would tell you, I think the most important thing here, and as a lawyer, there's a political side of this that I don't care. There's a legal side, which is, I think it's extremely difficult to impose some form of accountability after the fact. If you, after the fact is really the one time when you can't do this. Now, it's totally a political judgment whether the council feels it needs this. The one thing I would just say as a lawyer is, after the fact is when you can't do it.
I agree with Kyle too. It's like insurance. You hope you never need it, but if it's there. I think we've had some conversation about tweaking some of the language. I think you guys are taking notes on that. Would you guys be okay if they tweak the language, send it back to us, feel good about it? If we feel like it, do you feel like it should come back to a study session again? Or do you feel like you do, Carol?
I think it's that important.
Bring it back to another study session?
And we need to get the mayor and pro tem thing straightened out.
They're going to take that out.
Take that out.
So they'll tweak that. We'll bring it back to a study session, a 15, 20-minute chat, and then we can put it through to consent.
So if we're bringing it down, do we need even reprimand, the informal reprimand piece? If we have something, and I'm trying to find the right word, so I'm not going to try right now, but the the reprimand piece, if that is something that's going to try to, if it includes remedial or educational training, that's the piece, right? Where somebody gets some training to help them understand what to do better, more effectively, etc. But whatever that's called, all that goes on, whatever that is, it precedes, if somebody doesn't shape it up, that then precedes the public censure. So the idea is to try to help somebody.
Absolutely.
Help
Yeah, let's
themselves,
help somebody in their
rather
way they
than
do business. I think that's
slap you with a
I vote for that.
Well, I figured it was
Across
1,
the
2,
numbers.
3. It has to go through 1, 2, 3. It doesn't just move straight to a public censure there.
No,
Yeah, that's.
no,
why I read
that's
that.
severe, that's severe. Yeah, no.
Mark, is there something, does the city of Littleton have like a program or a resource that's almost like an anonymous resource?
Council anonymous.
Well, no, I'm sure, I don't know if it exists for the city employees. So a lot of corporations have like an employee assistance
Yes.
program that covers all kinds of things from
Absolutely.
legal to psychological to things like that, right?
Sure,
And so, to your point of, if someone can go to an independent source to say, here are some things that I'm feeling either uncomfortable about or I've witnessed, could that resource be made available to city council as well as city employees?
I don't know for sure, but I'd be more than happy to look into that.
All right,
We will update this, and I will pair it up with the sign code part 3.
perfect.
This feels like back to the.
Yes,
Funny
Groundhog Day.
I'm sorry.
We needed that.
The city attorney don't agree.
There. So, city manager, city attorney, any reports tonight? Any?
Just quickly, sorry for the distraction early on in the meeting here. Tyler was sharing with me that dispatch was getting a lot of calls during that storm here. So we had a lot of power outages, blown transformers throughout the community, alarms going off around the community here as a result of that, and flooding on Federal specifically. So we had a pretty intense rainstorm. Obviously, we saw that right out the window.
So are there routes we should avoid when we try to find our way home?
Santa Fe.
Federal. They got
Santa
the,
Fe's
they got the boats
red
out
shut
there, the
down.
road goes left.
Don't go on Federal.
Santa Fe.
Don't go home
I'm
on
going
Federal.
north though, so.
Yeah, I'll take it.
It would take 40 minutes to drive to Englewood right now.
Why? Because of the
In
storm?
Oxford, yeah, it flooded. There are cars underwater all in Santa Fe.
Really? In Inglewood?
Between ACC and Oxford, I was just.
Cars underwater?
Littleton Boulevard was a tricky one just coming there.
Well,
Oh,
hopefully
my.
we can gain access to our cars in the parking lot.
Yeah, that would be
Let's
fun.
hope our cars are still in the parking lot.
We might find them down
There was a waterfall on C470 by Champ.
A what?
A waterfall off of C470 on Champ. They were calling it Champ Falls.
nice,
C470
yeah.
flooded.
So no other report, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mayor, council, my report is attached to your packet regarding some comments that were made at the last meeting, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have those.
Did you speak with the person who brought up the comments to clarify?
No, I didn't, but I had a number of emails from that person or their representative. So I didn't speak, but I had the emails that generated the comment, but I would be happy to meet with that person and speak with them.
I have a question I posed this question to Steve and I think Mark and the mayor. These are comments that are coming up in the public and people are asking questions or making a comment, and we are asking staff on certain cases to answer them. But these answers come in the form of a memo in our package, so they may not actually be seen or heard by those that may be interested. What are some, I just want to hear some thoughts of, so instead of Steve saying it's in your packet, if Steve was to say, okay, here were the 3 questions that were asked, and here is the answer so that it's public. Is there concerns or some things we need to consider in kind of taking this further?
There was, I think when we
originally designed this, the intention was that there would be issues that were of a larger interest, and those issues, Steve would make a comment at one of our business meetings. So he would, when a city attorney comments, he would answer that bigger question. And then for those that didn't really hit that level, that this document would be prepared and that he would use his judgment. And I think you guys weigh in on that. Also, whether to reach out to that person individually too, because sometimes the citizen may want something very specific and want that answer, and I agree with you, they don't go back here. But then these guys make that determination to reach out to them and want them to know, either through an email or a phone call. Is that?
Yes, correct. So in the public comment, specifically, again, at our business meetings, between myself and the city attorney, we're trying to take note of those. And just as you say, that I'll use my judgment many times just to reach out to those people through the staff to kind of respond back to them. If I think it's significant enough, then I certainly would share that with council. I think I'll let Steve speak for himself, but sometimes his issues are just a little bit different than what I would typically address.
And normally, if it's done in the report, it's because it's kind of usually an issue that there's some historical background or there's some other background that needs to be evaluated and researched in order to provide an adequate response to the comment. There was something that I thought was sufficiently important that wanted a comment on the spot. You're going to get a comment on the spot. But on the other hand, if it's something that I think the historic research, if there was a comment about some council practices on legislative rules, that was one where to really answer that, you needed to go back and look at the historical context of how those came about in Littleton, because if you didn't do that, you really couldn't provide an adequate answer. And so, to me, my practice will be, if it's something that I think that there's a need to go back and look at the context, I'll go back and look at the context. If it's something that I think needs to be answered right there in the context isn't critical, I'm going to answer it right there.
Okay. And I do like the process we're doing now, because it used to be folks would ask questions and it just fell into a black hole. Mm-hmm. I think it's being addressed one way or another now. And we've always asked, at least now, we do ask, could you please, get back to them.
Rena, did you?
Were you going to add before?
Well, I think, I think just again, when we kind of laid out this with council previously, I did ask that allow us to use our judgment trying to decide exactly how to respond as opposed to some kind of cookbook approach. I guess I would be looking, if I see an issue that I feel warrants more of a public comment by me, I certainly wouldn't hesitate to do so. I can't think of any offhand. Fire, okay, that's one I suppose would be a little more unique.
But you did do that too.
Right, true. So I guess I'm trying to use my judgment. If you think you have an issue that maybe has come up, you got questions, and you would like me to kind of reconsider how I'm doing that, I'd be more than happy to have that discussion.
I actually trust your judgment, and I think this is good. I think you guys are doing that well. Maybe then my ask would simply be that when there is a response to public comment, instead of getting up there and reading all of the answers, just say, there has been a response to public comments on South Metro, the ballot language, and X. Please refer to the package to get a little bit more. So at least people know what the subject is.
Sure, that's right.
So I think that might be a good way to do it. So at least if it's something that was of interest or that they were paying attention to, they know that it has been addressed and they can go seek out that information. Would that
good suggestion
be a good kind of in between?
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Process question. We are meeting on the 31st for study session, so we lost our 5th Tuesday. That's okay. Beats losing a Saturday.
That's what I was hearing, yes.
And so we do not have another business meeting until August 7th, which is National Night Out. And we typically start it late so that people can. Now, we also have 6 public hearings that night. Oh. So they could go, we've got a consent agenda with, I'll have to count them, A through I.
Yep, that was a bunch.
6, 7, 9 on consent, which should be okay. I guess we're gonna move another one to consent. We have 2 things on general business, that is the city manager contract and the city attorney contract, because Jerry and I'll be finishing up the review process with each of them, I think next week. 27th. And so that should not have, that should be okay and not, turn into hours of conversation. And then, and then we have the second readings. So most of those are the amendments to the ballot. Most of those are the ballot issues. But, so I guess the question is, do you want to start at 7:30 on the 7th? And if we do we not need to make that a motion and a vote? In which case, would we need to have a special meeting on the 31st to do that vote before a study session?
Mayor, Council, I think you could provide simply direction to the city manager and clerk that asking that this meeting be set later because of National Night Out. I don't think you have to have an actual vote.
Because we vote in council meetings and to change.
You normally will vote to have special meetings, or you'll vote not to have a regular meeting. You're having your regular meeting, you're just simply setting the starting time later, which effectively, if 4 of you didn't show up until 7:30, we would just not start the meeting till then. So if you provide that direction informally.
Okay, as long as we're not violating any of our process.
I don't believe you'll be violating any of your process.
Okay, council, do you want to start at 7:30 on August 7th? Or 6:30? If you start at 6:30, then
We got a lot of business to do.
you don't get to, yeah,
What about 7?
we're 7, that's just a half
It
hour.
gives us a little more time without pushing it.
I'm okay with starting at 6:30, because we have a full agenda, it's pretty serious stuff.
I agree.
I also think our presence and being able to, kind of promote National Night Out and be engaged is always a good and positive things. We've gotten invites as a council, so.
A lot of these are starting earlier, though, I've noticed.
5:30,
On the back page, one starts at 4.
I think 6:30 is I'd be okay with 7 o'clock to buy us a little bit of time, but I think 6:30 just cuts it short.
Hey, you're at 7?
I'm at 7 too.
I think 7's good enough, honestly.
Okay, 7 o'clock. Split it right down the middle, that's a really good compromise.
I'll make the clerk aware of that.
Thank you. Yeah, let's get that up and posted, and that will allow for plenty of notice. So, because a lot of folks show up at 6:30, and then they sit, so, particularly with the public hearings. So tomorrow, we have Tri-Cities at 7:30 in Inglewood. The community room at the Inglewood City Center. Everybody knows how to get there. There's a parking garage, you can park underneath. Okay. And I guess that's it. That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Anybody have anything else? All right. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.